The assembly will now come to order. The chief clerk will call the roll.
Assembly members Anderson, Backus, Brown May, Carter, Cole, Considine, Dahlia, DeLong, Dickman, De Silva, Edgeworth, Flanagan, Gallant, Gonzalez, Goulding, Gray, Gurr, Hafen, Hanson, Hardy, Hibbets, Hunt, Jackson, Howdigi, Karras, Kasama, Koenig, LaRue Hatch, Marzola, Miller, Monroe Marino, Moore, Mosca, Nadeem, Wynn, O'Neill, Orentlicker, Roth, Torres Fawcett, Watts, Urick, Hibbets, Kasama, Speaker Yeager.
Here. Assembly member Howdigi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May the record reflect we have 41 members present, 1 absent excused.
The records shall so reflect. We do have a quorum. Would members of the assembly please rise for the prayer this morning by Chaplain Craig Swope from First Christian Church here in Carson City.
Good morning. Let's pray. Father, as we gather and settle into the rhythms of another session, help us to remember who we serve. Help us to remember why we serve. Help us respect those who serve with us, sometimes as allies, sometimes as opponents, but may the spirit of peace that you provide prevail in moments of tension or friction. Help us to remember that you are a God of order, not disorder, and in all things, help us to remember to thank you for your Son, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Order business 2, reading and approval of the journal.
Carson City, Monday, February 3rd, 2025. Pursuant to the provisions of the constitutional and statutes of the Assembly.
Assemblymember Howdigi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that further reading of the journal be suspended and authorize the Speaker and Chief Clerk to make the necessary corrections and additions.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Order business 7, messages from the Senate.
Senate Chamber, Carson City, February 3rd, 2025. To the Honorable the Assembly, I have the honor to inform your honorable body that the Senate on this day adopted Assembly Concurrent Resolution Number 1, signed Sherry L. Rodriguez, Assistant Secretary of the Senate.
Order business 8, motions, resolutions, and notices.
Assembly Joint Resolution Number 1, introduced by Assembly Member Anderson. Proposes to amend the Nevada Constitution to revise certain provisions relating to property taxes. Assembly Joint Resolution Number 2, introduced by Assembly Member Kasama. Proposes to amend the Nevada Constitution to require that the language of the bill or joint resolution be made available to the public at least 72 hours before a House may vote on the final passage of the bill or joint resolution. Assembly Joint Resolution Number 3, introduced by Assembly Member Kasama. Revises provisions relating to the legislature. Assembly Joint Resolution Number 4, introduced by Assembly Member Kasama. Revises provisions relating to the legislative process. Assembly Joint Resolution Number 5, introduced by Assembly Member Kasama. Revises provisions relating to redistricting. Assembly Joint Resolution Number 6, introduced by Assembly Member Miller. Urges Congress to extend the Social Security Fairness Act. Assembly Joint Resolution Number 7, introduced by Assembly Members Watts, Mosca, and Hibbets, and Senators Wynn and Stone. Proposes to amend the Nevada Constitution to revise provisions relating to the compensation of certain elected officers.
Assemblymember Howdigi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Joint Resolutions 1 through 7 be referred to the committees shown on today's Assembly floor agenda dated February 4th, 2025.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. They're so referred. And members, just so you know, we're going to move the introduction of the pre-filed measures at the end. You have a list on your desk of all the pre-filed assembly bills on today's floor agenda, and our chief clerk is going to read all 200 plus of those, and then at the end we will work on moving those to the appropriate committee. So we are still under order of business 9. Order of business 9, introduction, first reading, and reference of bills.
Assembly Bill 1, introduced by Government Affairs, voids certain regulations relating to the development and disposal of land in the Fort Mojave Valley. Assembly Bill Number 2, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to state purchasing. Assembly Bill 3, introduced by Judiciary, increases the monetary threshold for mandatory, non-binding arbitration in civil actions. Assembly Bill 4, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to probation and lifetime supervision. Assembly Bill 5, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises provisions governing contractors who perform work on residential photovoltaic systems used in to produce electricity. Assembly Bill 6, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services, establishes the Fetal Alcohol Syndrome Disorder Treatment Assistance Program within the Aging and Disability Services Division of the Department of Health and Human Services. Assembly Bill 7, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to the Juvenile Justice Oversight Commission. Assembly Bill 8, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to the State Financial Administration. Assembly Bill 9, introduced by Assembly Committee on Natural Resources, revises provisions governing the temporary conversion of agriculture water. Assembly Bill 10, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to the local improvement projects. Assembly Bill 11, introduced by Committee on Revenue, revises provisions governing the Department of Taxation. Assembly Bill 12, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises requirements for obtaining judicial review of a decision of the Board of Review concerning a claim for unemployment benefits. Assembly Bill 13, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to criminal justice. Assembly Bill 14, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to certain public officers. Assembly Bill 15, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to Medicaid fraud. Assembly Bill 16, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, makes an appropriation to Mineral County for the construction of a new county jail. Assembly Bill 17, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to the writ of garnishment. Assembly Bill 18, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to the electronic filing of certain documents. Assembly Bill 19, introduced by the Committee on Health and Human Services, revises provisions relating to the statewide substance use response working group. Assembly Bill 20, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, revises provisions relating to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Assembly Bill 21, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises provisions relating to the unemployment compensation. Assembly Bill 22, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to the Public Employees Benefit Program. Assembly Bill 23, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to public works. Assembly Bill 23, introduced by the Committee on Education, revises provisions governing competency-based education. Assembly Bill 25, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to offenders. Assembly Bill 26, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, revises provisions relating to dams. Assembly Bill 27, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to public employees' retirement system. Assembly Bill 28, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to transportation. Assembly Bill 29, introduced by the Natural Resources Committee, revises provisions relating to motor vehicle fuel. Assembly Bill 30, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to records of defendants who have been found incompetent. Assembly Bill 31, introduced by the Committee on Health and Human Services, provides for certain Medicaid reimbursement of providers of non-emergency secure behavioral health transport services. Assembly Bill 32, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, directs the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Growth and Infrastructure to conduct a study during the 25-26 interim concerning the Nevada Commission for the reconstruction of the V&T Railroad of Carson City and Story County. Assembly Bill 33, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, creates the Nevada Office of the Inspector General. Assembly Bill 34, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to certain crimes. Assembly Bill 31, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to pornography involving minors. Assembly Bill 36, introduced by the Committee on Health and Human Services, revises provisions relating to Medicaid. Assembly Bill 37, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to housing. Assembly Bill 38, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises various provisions relating to housing. Assembly Bill 39, introduced by the Committee on Education, revises provisions governing charter schools. Assembly Bill 40, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, revises various provisions relating to environmental hazards. Assembly Bill 41, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to the state militia. Assembly Bill 42, introduced by the Committee on Health and Human Services, revises provisions governing the adoption of the regulations for the administration of certain programs of public assistance. Assembly Bill 43, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to public works. Assembly Bill 44, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, prohibits manipulating the price of essential good or service in this state. Assembly Bill 45, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to certain public bodies. Assembly Bill 46, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, revises provisions relating to privileges applicable to information obtained from records and other property of public utilities and certain other entities. Assembly Bill 47, introduced by the Committee on Ways and Means, revises provisions relating to the Education Stabilization Account. Assembly Bill 48, introduced by the Committee on Education, revises provisions relating to bullying. Assembly Bill 49, introduced by Education, revises provisions relating to educational personnel. Assembly Bill 50, introduced by Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to victims of mass casualty incident. Assembly Bill 51, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to public records. Assembly Bill 52, introduced by Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises provisions relating to the payment of claims under policies of health insurance. Assembly Bill 53, introduced by the Committee on Education, establishes provisions relating to outdoor recreational education. Assembly Bill 54, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, revises penalties for failing to take certain precautions when approaching a traffic incident. Assembly Bill 55, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions to motor vehicle crashes. Assembly Bill 56, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises provisions relating to the licensing of certain health care. Assembly Bill 57, introduced by Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to the Nevada intrastate mutual aid system. Assembly Bill 58, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises various provisions relating to gaming. Assembly Bill 59, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, revises provisions relating to governmental administration. Assembly Bill 60, introduced by the Committee on Health and Human Services, revises provisions relating to certain behavioral health services. Assembly Bill 61, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, authorizes the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County or any local government within Washoe County to establish a demonstration project for a certain toll road. Assembly Bill 62, introduced by the Committee on Revenue, revises provisions relating to transferable tax credits for affordable housing. Assembly Bill 63, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to the civil actions for wrongful conviction. Assembly Bill 64, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to public meetings. Assembly Bill 65, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to guardianship. Assembly Bill 66, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to district courts. Assembly Bill 67, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, establishes the Nevada Baby Bonds Program. Assembly Bill 68, introduced by Commerce and Labor, revises provisions relating to housing. Assembly Bill 69, introduced by the Committee on Revenue, removes the prospective expiration of the Nye County Sales and Use Tax of 2007. Assembly Bill 70, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, revises provisions relating to energy. Assembly Bill 71, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises the list of activities that constitute the practice of veterinary medicine and to exclude the subcutaneous implantation of identification microchips into an animal. Assembly Bill 72, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to notary publics and document preparation services. Assembly Bill 73, introduced by Legislative Operations and Elections, establishes requirements for certain communications relating to an election. Assembly Bill 74, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises provisions relating to insurance. Assembly Bill 75, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions governing grants made by the state. Assembly Bill 76, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to cannabis. Assembly Bill 77, introduced by the Committee on Revenue, revises provisions governing tax abatements for certain businesses. Assembly Bill 78, introduced by the Committee on Revenue, revises provisions relating to the licenses for the distribution of alcoholic beverages. Assembly Bill 79, introduced by Legislative Operations and Elections, revises provisions relating to campaign finance. Assembly Bill 80, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, establishes provisions relating to soil health. Assembly Bill 81, introduced by Assemblymember LaRue Hatch, exempts the state of Nevada from provisions of federal law relating to daylight savings time. Assembly Bill 82, introduced by Assemblymember De Silva, requires the governor to proclaim certain days of observance. Assembly Bill 83, introduced by Assemblymember Mosca, designates Larry Idlong Day as a day of observance in the state. Assembly Bill 84, introduced by Assemblymember Koenig, revises provisions relating to county roads. Assembly Bill 85, introduced by Assemblymember Watts, authorizes the management of designated invertebrates. Assembly Bill 86, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, revises provisions relating to logging permits. Assembly Bill 87, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, makes an appropriation relating to wildlife crossings. Assembly Bill 88, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to juvenile justice. Assembly Bill 89, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, imposes certain requirements relating to unclothed searches of children at certain juvenile justice facilities. Assembly Bill 90, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to juvenile justice. Assembly Bill 91, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to parole. Assembly Bill 92, introduced by Assemblymember Dickman et al., revises provisions relating to elections. Assembly Bill 93, introduced by Hibbets et al., revises provisions relating to public employees. Assembly Bill 94, introduced by Assemblymember O'Neill, revises provisions relating to public works. Assembly Bill 95, introduced by Assemblymember Watts, makes an appropriation to the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation for exhibits and improvements at the National Atomic Testing Museum. Assembly Bill 96, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to master plans. Assembly Bill 97, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions relating to public safety. Assembly Bill 98, introduced by Assemblymember Moore, creates a day of observance for late labor leader Dolores Herda. Assembly Bill 99, introduced by Assemblymember Gurr, designates the pecan punch as the official state drink of the state of Nevada. Assembly Bill 100, introduced by Assemblymember Gurr, revises provisions relating to economic development of regional commercial air service in the state. Assembly Bill 101, introduced by Assemblymember Ortlicker, revises provisions governing health care. Assembly Bill 102, introduced by the Committee on Health and Human Services, revises provisions relating to emergency medical services. Assembly Bill 103, introduced by Assemblymember O'Neill, revises provisions relating to Housing Authority. Assembly Bill 104, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, revises provisions relating to water. Assembly Bill 105, introduced by Assemblymember Howdegi, revises provisions governing firearms. Assembly Bill 106, introduced by Assemblymember Marzola, ratifies the Occupational Therapy Licensure Compact. Assembly Bill 107, introduced by Assemblymember Brown May, revises provisions relating to foster care. Assembly Bill 108, introduced by Assemblymember Howdegi et al., makes appropriation to the Outdoor Education and Recreation Grant Program account. Assembly Bill 109, introduced by Assemblymember LaRue Hatch, revises provisions relating to water. Assembly Bill 110, introduced by Assemblymember Gallant, revises provisions relating to the designation of certain highways. Assembly Bill 111, introduced by Assemblymember Hibbets, revises provisions relating to certain traffic violations. Assembly Bill 112, introduced by Assemblymember Wynn, removes an exemption from provisions providing certain employees with the right to use sick leave to assist family members. Assembly Bill 113, introduced by Assemblymember Dahlia, makes an appropriation to the Workforce Innovations for a new Nevada account. Assembly Bill 114, introduced by Assemblymember DeLong, revises provisions relating to county fair and recreation boards. Assembly Bill 115, introduced by Assemblymember Karras, authorizes certain state buildings to be used for certain purposes. Assembly Bill 116, introduced by Assemblymember Torres Fawcett, revises provisions relating to food delivery service platform providers. Assembly Bill 117, introduced by Assembly Members Brown May et al., revises provisions relating to special license plates. Assembly Bill 118, introduced by Assemblymember Kasama, revises provisions relating to domestic relations. Assembly Bill 119, introduced by Assemblymember Yeager, revises provisions relating to paramilitary activity. Assembly Bill 120, introduced by Assembly Member Kazama, provides for the review of certain regulations by the legislature. Assembly Bill 121, introduced by Assembly Member Considine, revises provisions governing landlords and tenants. Assembly Bill 122, introduced by Assemblywoman Dickman, makes various changes relating to the confidentiality of certain information. Assembly Bill 123, introduced by Assembly Member Nadeem, revises provisions relating to election communications. Assembly Bill 124, introduced by Assembly Member Dickman, revises provisions relating to the public office. Assembly Bill 125, introduced by Assembly Member Flanagan, revises provisions relating to public bodies. Assembly Bill 126, introduced by Assembly Member Hardy, revises provisions relating to pornography involving minors. Assembly Bill 127, introduced by the Committee on Ways and Means, makes for an appropriation to the Office of the New Americans in the Office of the Governor to provide grants to counties and cities to implement language access programs. Assembly Bill 128, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, creates the Office of the Public Records Ombudsman in the Executive Department of State Government. Assembly Bill 129, introduced by Assembly Member Dickman, revises provisions governing bidding procedures for a homeowners association. Assembly Bill 120, introduced by Assembly Member Flanagan, makes an appropriation to Goodwill of Southern Nevada for expanding workforce development initiatives. Assembly Bill 131, introduced by Assembly Member Jackson, revises provisions relating to housing. Assembly Bill 132, introduced by Assembly Member York, revises provisions relating to water. Assembly Bill 133, introduced by Assembly Member Gurr, revises provisions governing public financial administration. Assembly Bill 134, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, revises provisions relating to water conservation. Assembly Bill 135, introduced by Assembly Members Urick et al., revises provisions relating to certain tax exemptions for veterans and surviving spouses of veterans. Assembly Bill 136, introduced by Assembly Member Considine, revises provisions relating to animals. Assembly Bill 137, introduced by Assembly Member Torres Fawcett, revises requirements for the advertising of a sale of personal property to satisfy a lien of an owner of a facility for storage. Assembly Bill 138, introduced by Assembly Member Gallant, revises provisions relating to curriculum standards for teaching the personal safety of children. Assembly Bill 139, introduced by Assembly Member Fawcett, makes an appropriation to the Department of Education for programs of dual credit. Assembly Bill 140, introduced by Assembly Member Gonzalez, revises provisions governing driver authorization cards. Assembly Bill 141, introduced by Assembly Member Wynn, revises provisions relating to the Judicial Department of the state government. Assembly Bill 142, introduced by Assembly Member Marzola, revises provisions relating to industrial insurance. Assembly Bill 143, introduced by Assembly Member Marzola, enacts the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact. Assembly Bill 144, introduced by Assembly Member Backus, revises provisions relating to Indigenous Peoples Day in Nevada. Assembly Bill 145, introduced by Assembly Members De Silva et al., revises provisions relating to veterans. Assembly Bill 146, introduced by Assembly Member Gallant, revises provisions relating to the fundamental rights of parents. Assembly Bill 147, introduced by Assembly Member Hafen, revises proof of identity to vote. Assembly Bill 148, introduced by Assembly Member Hafen, revises provisions relating to elections. Assembly Bill 149, introduced by Assembly Member Carter, revises provisions relating to cannabis. Assembly Bill 150, introduced by Assembly Member Orant Liquor, revises provisions relating to tribal judges. Assembly Bill 151, introduced by Assembly Member Gray, revises provisions relating to the crime of solicitation of prostitution. Assembly Bill 152, introduced by Assembly Member Gray, revises provisions relating to public records. Assembly Bill 153, introduced by Assembly Member Miller, revises provisions relating to education of incarcerated persons. Assembly Bill 154, introduced by Assembly Member Miller, creates the Nevada Office of the Inspector General. Assembly Bill 155, introduced by LaRue Hatch et al., revises provisions relating to public employees. Assembly Bill 156, introduced by Assembly Member Mosca, revises provisions governing the salary of members of Board of Trustees of certain school districts. Assembly Bill 157, introduced by Assembly Members Gray et al., revises provisions relating to the Nevada National Guard. Assembly Bill 158, introduced by Assembly Member Roth, revises provisions relating to jurisdiction. Assembly Bill 159, introduced by Assembly Member Hardy, establishes the HOPE card program for applicants who have been granted an extended order for protection against domestic violence. Assembly Bill 160, introduced by Assembly Members Yeager et al., creates the Nevada Ireland Trade Commission. Assembly Bill 161, introduced by Assemblymember Edgeworth, makes revisions relating to hospice care. Assembly Bill 162, introduced by Assemblymember Urick, establishes the statewide database and internet website for certain criminal records relating to domestic violence. Assembly Bill 163, introduced by Assemblymember Hafen, enters into the Counseling Compact. Assembly Bill 164, introduced by Assemblymember O'Neill, revises provisions relating to the account for student identification. Assembly Bill 165, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, revises provisions relating to outdoor education. Assembly Bill 166, introduced by Assemblymembers Moore et al., revises provisions relating to the employment of minors. Assembly Bill 167, introduced by Assemblymember Hansen, revises provisions relating to the use of corrective room restriction. Assembly Bill 168, introduced by Assemblymember Goulding, revises provisions relating to bicycles, electric bikes, and electric scooters. Assembly Bill 169, introduced by Assemblyman Yeager, requires that certain health insurance policies and health plans cover speech language pathology for certain purposes. Assembly Bill 170, introduced by Assemblymember Nadeem, providing for the licensure of associate physicians and associate osteopath physicians. Assembly Bill 171, introduced by Assemblymembers Yeager et al., authorizes the state quarantine officer to order the temporary suspension of certain prohibitions relating to the sale, offer, or exposing of sale or transport for sale of eggs produced by egg-laying hens in certain enclosures under certain circumstances. Assembly Bill 172, introduced by Assemblymember Hansen, revises provisions relating to the disclosure of certain records stored on the Internet. Assembly Bill 173, introduced by Assemblymember Dickman, revises provisions relating to judicial office. Assembly Bill 174, introduced by Assemblymember Marzola, revises provisions relating to the telecommunication providers. Assembly Bill 175, introduced by Assemblymember Hibbets, revises provisions relating to public safety. Assembly Bill 176, introduced by Assemblymember Torres Fawcett, revises provisions relating to reproductive health. Assembly Bill 177, introduced by Assemblymember Gonzalez, makes various changes relating to audiology, fitting, and dispensing hearing aids and speech language pathology. Assembly Bill 178, introduced by Assemblymember Gray, revises provisions relating to elections. Assembly Bill 179, introduced by Assemblymember LaRue Hatch, revises provisions relating to employment. Assembly Bill 180, introduced by Assemblymember De Silva, revises provisions relating to local governments. Assembly Bill 181, introduced by Assemblymember Gallant, provides immunity from civil liability to persons returning a firearm under certain circumstances. Assembly Bill 182, introduced by Assemblymember Dickman, creates the Legislative Committee on the Reduction of Non-Essential State Expenditures. Assembly Bill 183, introduced by Assemblymember Koenig, revises provisions relating to optometry. Assembly Bill 184, introduced by Assemblymember Anderson, revises provisions relating to interscholastic activities. Assembly Bill 185, introduced by Assemblymember Anderson, revises provisions related to child care. Assembly Bill 186, introduced by Assemblymember Ortlicker, revises provisions governing pharmacists. Assembly Bill 189, introduced by Assemblymember Dahlia, revises provisions relating to pornography. Assembly Bill 188, introduced by Assemblymember Carter, revises provisions relating to the Public Employees Benefit Program. Assembly Bill 189, introduced by Assemblymember Koenig, revises provisions relating to notary publics. Assembly Bill 190, introduced by Assemblymember Gurr, revises provisions relating to water. Assembly Bill 191, introduced by Assemblymember Anderson, revises provisions relating to collective bargaining. Assembly Bill 192, introduced by Assemblymember Backus, makes various changes relating to real property. Assembly Bill 193, introduced by Assemblymember Koenig, revises provisions relating to certain victims of certain crime. Assembly Bill 194, introduced by Assemblymember Howdeggy, prohibits the release of certain balloons that are lighter than air under certain circumstances. Assembly Bill 195, introduced by Assemblymember Urick, revises provisions governing boards of trustees of school districts. Assembly Bill 196, introduced by Assemblymember Backus, revises provisions governing psychology. Assembly Bill 197, introduced by Assemblymember Backus, enacts provisions strengthening certain protections for certain activities under the First Amendment. Assembly Bill 198, introduced by Assemblymember Brown May, establishes provisions relating to certain inflatable devices. Assembly Bill 199, introduced by Assemblymember De Silva, revises provisions relating to firearms. Assembly Bill 200, introduced by Assemblymember Karras, revises provisions relating to industrial insurance. Assembly Bill 201, introduced by Assemblymember Roth, revises provisions relating to the sealing of records for summary evictions. Assembly Bill 202, introduced by Assemblymember Brown May, revises provisions relating to claims for dental care. Assembly Bill 203, introduced by Assemblymember Carter, revises provisions relating to cannabis. Assembly Bill 204, introduced by Carter, Assemblymember Carter revises provisions relating to medical debt. Assembly Bill 205, introduced by Assemblymember Goulding, revises provisions governing sexual education. AB Assembly Bill 206, introduced by Assemblymember Cole, repeals certain provisions which prohibit an insurer from issuing or renewing certain policies of liability insurance. Assembly Bill 207, introduced by Assemblymember Cole, revises provisions governing the submission of certain information to the Commissioner of Insurance relating to mental health parity and addiction equity. Assembly Bill 208, introduced by Assemblymember Yeager, restricts the use of certain products by governmental entities and government-funded entities. Assembly Bill 209, introduced by Assemblymember Orentlicher, provides immunity from criminal liability for engaging in prostitution or committing certain acts while engaged in prostitution. Assembly Bill 210, introduced by Assemblymember Hardy, provides for the administration of certain examinations and assessments through remote means to pupils enrolled in a program of distance education. Assembly Bill 211, introduced by Assemblymember Considine, revises provisions relating to the substandard properties. Assembly Bill 212, introduced by Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, revises provisions relating to early childhood education. Assembly Bill 213, introduced by Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, revises provisions governing public works projects. Assembly Bill 214, introduced by Assemblymember Hafen, revises provisions governing Nevada Educational Choice Scholarship Program. Assembly Bill 215, introduced by Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, revises provisions relating to employment. Assembly Bill 216, introduced by Assemblymember Hardy, revises provisions relating to domestic violence. Assembly Bill 217, introduced by Assemblymember Gonzalez, revises provisions relating to law enforcement on school property. Assembly Bill 218, introduced by Assemblymember Gonzalez, requires the court administrator in each court in this state to establish a program to send certain communications regarding court proceedings by text message. Assembly Bill 219, introduced by Assemblymember Watts, revises provisions relating to the use of the proceeds of the tax on live entertainment. Assembly Bill 220, introduced by Assemblymember Hunt, authorizes the issuance of identification cards by the Department of Health and Human Services to persons experiencing homelessness under certain circumstances. Assembly Bill 121, introduced by Assemblymember Edgeworth, exempts certain offices of physicians and other healthcare facilities from certain permitting requirements relating to anesthesia and sedation. Assembly Bill 122, introduced by Assemblymember Jackson, revises provisions relating to public works. Assembly Bill 123, introduced by Assemblymember Considine, revises provisions relating to the habitability of residential rental properties. Assembly Bill 224, introduced by Assemblymember Mosca, provides for the issuance of bonds to assist certain school districts in financing capital improvements. Assembly Bill 225, introduced by Assemblymember Wynn, revises provisions relating to licensing of certain professions and occupations. Assembly Bill 226, introduced by Assemblymember Mosca, revises provisions relating to economic development. Assembly Bill 227, introduced by Assemblymember Miller, revises provisions governing adoption.
Does anybody want to hear those read again? Assemblymember Howdegi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bills 1 through Assembly Bills 227 be referred to the committees as listed on the Assembly floor agenda that all members have a copy of on their desk, dated February 4th, 2025.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bills 1 through Assembly Bill 227 are referred to the committee shown on today's Assembly floor agenda, dated February 4th, 2025. Assemblymember Howdegi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the motion whereby Assembly Bill 54 was referred to the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure be rescinded.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblymember Howdegi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 54 be re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bill 54 is re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Assemblymember Howdegi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the motion whereby Assembly Bill 87 was referred to the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure be rescinded.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 87 be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bill 87 is referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the motion whereby Assembly Bill 107 was referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services be rescinded.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 107 be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bill 107 is re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the motion whereby Assembly Bill 111 was referred to the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure be rescinded.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 111 be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bill 111 is re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the motion whereby Assembly Bill 119 was referred to your Committee on Government Affairs be rescinded.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 119 be re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bill 119 is re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the motion whereby Assembly Bill 171 was referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services be rescinded.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 171 be re-referred to the Committee on Natural Resources.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bill 171 is re-referred to the Committee on Natural Resources. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the motion whereby Assembly Bill 175 was referred to the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure be rescinded.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 175 be re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bill 175 is re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the motion whereby Assembly Bill 197 was referred to the Committee on Government Affairs be rescinded.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblymember Howdigee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 197 be re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assembly Bill 197 is re-referred to the Committee on Judiciary. That will take us to Order Business 15, remarks from the floor. If you'd like to speak, please let me know. We'll start with Assemblymember Watts.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Transportation Day at the Nevada Legislature. We have our metropolitan planning organizations joining us, including the Nevada Department of Transportation, the RTC of Southern Nevada, RTC of Washoe County, the Carson Area MPO, also known as CAMPO, and TRPA, representing Lake Tahoe. Special thanks to all of them for their hard work to improve our infrastructure and help provide mobility for our communities all across the state. Because of them, it helps our communities and constituents thrive with safer, more efficient transit systems. So please make sure, I know they were up in 3100 earlier, make sure you get a chance to connect with them, and we'll also be hosting them for some presentations in the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure after floor. And if anybody is here for Transportation Day, please stand up in the audience so we can recognize you. Thank you.
Assemblymember Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Order of Business 15.
Order Business 15.
Thank you. Today I would like to introduce my guests Ebony O2 and Emily Crawford from the News Literacy Project. I'll be providing them a proclamation today. The News Literacy Project is building a national movement to create systematic change in American education to ensure students are skilled in news literacy before they graduate from high school, giving them the knowledge and ability to participate in civic society as well-informed critical thinkers. I also want to just give a little background on Emily. She is a Nevadan, and actually, she just sent me a photo from 10 years ago of us here at the legislature lobbying, and so it's really awesome to come full circle, and thank you all so much. Here you go.
Is there any other order of business 15 this afternoon? Assembly Member Howdigi?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 minute recess, please.
We'll be in a 1-minute recess. The Assembly will come back to order. Last call for any order of business 15. Assembly Member Howdigi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some announcements for the floor before we adjourn. As you heard from my colleague, today is Transportation Day at the Legislature. They will be in room 3100 until 1 p.m., so please stop by and visit them. We also have the new legislative reception at the Plaza Event Center this evening. It begins at 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. All new legislators will be introduced at 6 p.m., so let's make sure to all be there and help them feel welcomed in Carson City. Transportation is available by Legislative Police at the east entrance of the building to and from the Plaza Event Center beginning at 5:15. And seeing no other business before us, Speaker, I move that we adjourn until Thursday, February 6th at the hour of 11:30 a.m.
Assembly Member Howdigi has moved that the Assembly stand adjourned until Thursday, February 6, 2025 at the hour of 11:30 a.m. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.